Hi, David. Thank you for joining me for this commercial edition. And just a bit of background, you're a partner who heads up our corporate team. I appreciate a lot of people have seen Suits and they assume that you'll be rolling in from one meeting out to another and probably at a basketball court. Let's get that out of the way. Is that what you've done today?
Yeah, essentially, I have just come off the basketball court. Do you know, I've never seen Suits, so all these references get lost on me, but I'm assured it is not like that. No, there's been no basketball played at all, so
Fair enough.
far more sedate offering, I suspect.
Well, at least the reality is there for those who either want a career in corporate law or, of course, want to know exactly what the corporate lawyers do day to day and why it appears, at least on the outset, that they're getting the most press. And, of course, they seem to be the busiest lawyers out there. So explain to me, for a lay person, what is the traditional day for a corporate lawyer? I appreciate it varies.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting point, that, because you do kind of get that vibe that corporate law is like the glamorous department, perhaps. I don't really know why that might be. I suspect when you watch films, TVs, maybe it's corporate style transactions which are getting used in those sorts of media. But yeah, it's, we're just another team within the firm. So what we do in a nutshell is we buy and sell companies for our clients. It's as simple as that. And that comes in all different shapes and sizes. But yeah, that in a nutshell is what we do. We help our clients to grow their businesses or sell them when they've reached end of life, whether that's because they're looking to retire or move on, or on the acquisition side, if they're looking to buy and build, they're growing with a view to exit, whether it's through flotation on the stock markets, private equity, or just to another trade sale. So yeah, just putting those pieces in place to help people move their businesses around.
Brilliant. So for many people, I appreciate a corporate transaction isn't something they're doing very often, at least not for the end client. There'll be many parties involved, such as accountants who, of course, like yourself, do this day in, day out. And for many, it's a lifetime achievement. They've grown what's traditionally a family-run business or a very small, tight-knit community, which has grown for various reasons over the years. And now some may want to retire, some may want to exit the business. A competitor may be purchasing them. And of course, these are all the good news stories that we hear. So what's your one piece of advice to them companies who are going through this process? It's all very new to them. And the things to really look out for.
Yeah, I mean, one piece of advice is difficult, but a couple of really important pointers, I think, is firstly, be prepared. Get yourself prepared. Speak to your advisors as the earliest possible opportunities. If you're thinking that maybe you want to sell, particularly on the sell side, if you got that idea in mind that actually, maybe in the next 6, 12, 24 months, I'm going to look to sell my business, start speaking to your advisors at that point. Talk with them. What does the process look like? What can we be doing now in advance to get the business and the company looking in a really good shape that we can take it to market and present it to possible buyers or investors in the best possible light? So I think that's something you can do quite early out. Once it gets to transaction time, buckle in. I think, especially for owner managers and SME owners, the one bit of feedback that we regularly get is the amount of effort that it takes to deal with the sale of the business. Plus, you also got your day job of actually running the business itself, because you can't stop running the business for 2-3 months while you're selling it. So that doubling up of the time is... It always comes as a surprise. And, I talk to my clients at the outset of deals saying, make sure you've got that capacity, but it's still difficult to juggle those two elements. So, yeah, I think preparation in the first instance, and then just block yourself some time out and probably book a holiday at the end of it.
Most certainly. I'm sure it's deserved, especially after the legals are done, so to speak. So looking at it purely from a litigation perspective, as that's what I do day to day. I've had the pleasure of working with you on matters where, unfortunately, it's not always as pleasant as we've just discussed. There's been minority shareholder or even majority shareholder disputes, in essence. The shareholders have fallen out with each other in simple terms, and one may be the party that wants to keep the business and one may be the party that wants to leave the business. Of course, once they've locked heads, really had a good fallout in simple terms, they still need your services to try and put the emotions aside, because at the end of the day, without the business, there's no benefit for either party.
That's it. I mean, it's always a difficult place to get to. And one of the other aspects of the job that we do is putting together constitutional documents, so shareholders agreements, partnership agreements. And those are documents which help kind of govern what that situation might look like in the worst case scenario. And we always kind of say, prepare for battle by doing that in peacetime, because when everyone's still friendly, you can put those agreements in place and then put them away in the drawer and hopefully never read them again. But if it ever does get to a position where business partners fall out for whatever reason, and there might be any number of reasons why that happened, not necessarily anything particularly nefarious, but then at least you've got a framework within which you guys can operate and do that piece of work whilst trying to take that friction out of it. But yeah, again, we kind of bookend that whole thing, I think. So if we're involved at that process right at the start, then there is this falling out, and you guys come in and knock everyone's heads together and kind of go, okay, we've reached a broad agreement that this is what everyone wants to get out of it, and people walk away with maybe not happy, but at least everyone's content with the outcome. Then it will come back onto our desk and say, okay, now we can tidy this up and put the legal paperwork in place to achieve what you guys have agreed, whether it's through negotiations, mediations, or ultimately court settlements. So yeah, that's where we would come in and go, okay, this is what's been agreed. We're not fighting anymore. This is just trying to procedurally get that achieved and over the line so that people can get on with their lives.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on a very valid point there, where a lot of businesses are in corporation, the spirits are high, everyone's happy, they're seeing themselves as, we're going to be on the stock exchange for some, or some we're going to, this is our growth plan.
Yep.
And they really miss the formalities at the very beginning when, as I just mentioned, everyone's quite happy. To try and have a shareholders agreement introduced later in the day, let's say 3 years into a trading business, not to say it isn't possible, but people have a way of dealing with each other through that period, and they may be second guessing why one party is suggesting that.
Yeah.
So would you say it's really, if you're looking at the bigger picture, more cost efficient for them to have that document prepared right from the outset?
Absolutely. And look, startup businesses, everyone knows cash is tight. So things like legal spend on a shareholders agreement, where you might be spending a couple of £1,000s for something that you don't think you need and hopefully never use, can feel a bit of a forced purchase. And so I understand the resistance to spending that money at the outset. But you're right, it is the best time to do it. And, with shareholders agreements, we always say that you should look at them every couple of years just to make sure they're still current, they're still achieving what you set out to achieve. Businesses grow, they expand, you get new shareholders in, different parties have different levels of investment, for example. So they do need updating. But there's a difference between updating something that you've already done and introducing it partway through, where you say that there might potentially be the opportunity to sow a little seed of discontent or suspicion. But I think the cost point is the easy win. I mean, without wishing to put kind of our ideas in people's heads as to what litigation fees look like, it's far more expensive to instruct you to deal with some litigation than it is to instruct me to do a shareholders agreement, probably by a factor of 10 or more, because it's a long, complicated process, whereas the shareholders agreement is a reasonably straightforward, friendly transaction. So yeah, it's one of those where you can spend a little bit up front rather than potentially spending tens of thousands of pounds later down the line.
Yeah, perfect. So for many, as I said at the outset, the business has been acquired by, say, a competitor, someone in a similar industry. We have very recently worked on a similar case, or should I say a case together, which the facts are very similar to what I'm about to say. And there's been suggestions of deferred payments. So from your client's perspective, I appreciate for many there's a bit of hesitation. What does that mean? What does that look like? And how can we encapsulate that so we are paid? So it goes back to the point of many trying to run this process on their own, which it's once in a lifetime for most. What would you say is crucial at that stage when looking at elements such as deferred payment?
Yeah, I think, like you say, it's for most people, for most business owners, you'll only do this once, possibly twice in your career. For certain industries and certain businesses that they're doing this far more frequently, but that is not the norm for you kind of the owner managers. So when it gets to that point, there is quite a lot of jargon, a lot of technical stuff that gets thrown around in terms of things like deferred consideration, security, all that other good stuff. And I think it really helps to kind of take some of the mystique out of the documentation by speaking to somebody who deals with it day in, day out. So taking deferred consideration, for example, that means is we're going to pay you some now, we're going to pay you some later. Yeah. But encapsulated within that fairly simple phrase is any number of pitfalls. So will I get paid? If you're saying, well, you're going to pay me £500,000 today, 250 grand next year and 250 grand the next year, well, what are the chances of me getting that extra £500,000 that I'm due? Because effectively you're then making an interest-free loan to the person who's buying your business. So yeah, you've got to be worried. You've got to be mindful. Is the buyer going to be good for that money in a year and 2 years' time? If not, or if there's a suggestion that they may not, is this the right deal? Is it a good deal? Is it a market standard type of deal? And if so, what can we then do to try and help that? So are we looking at interest provisions? Are we looking at security provisions? Are we looking at putting money into escrow? Are we looking at seller protections to perhaps limit the level of expenditure that the new owners can put the business through to kind of moderate the cash flow to make sure there's the best chance of getting that money? There's all these different things that factor into that really simple pay some now, pay some later. So having someone who dealt with all of those different possibilities, I think, is really important, just to help guide you through it and say, this is what's normal, this is perhaps a little bit unusual, this is perhaps really unusual, and where do you want to land in that whole minefield to make yourself have the best possible opportunity to get your money?
Yeah, well, certainly. And I guess looking at it on the flip side, where the smaller businesses, so to speak, appreciate I use the term smaller quite loosely, they've built this business, never had an intention to sell it, and now company X has come in and said, we'll make you simply put an offer you can't refuse. Whilst on the surface, this seems to be brilliant. They want to rush through the deal. Many will probably say due diligence, we don't need it. They know what we're doing. We know what they're doing. They want to pay us X amount, and let's get this done by next Friday, and I can go and retire and sail off into the sunset, so to speak. What are the risks of rushing into a deal? And the more important element, I guess, are indemnities and warranties. How can that figure of X very quickly be diluted and you don't have the company in your hand anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we're seeing increasingly, particularly since COVID, that people want to get deals done far more quickly for whatever reason. But yeah, I think as a seller, and there are risks on both sides, to be fair, with that approach, but as a seller, you're looking at going, okay, they're going to offer me £1 million for my business here. That's brilliant. Absolutely. Snap the hand off for that. But especially if there's no due diligence being done on the buyer, and if the buyer is reasonably savvy, what they will probably be doing, as you've alluded to in the question, is including a suite of warranties. Warranties are effectively promises that you as a seller make about every aspect of your business, which, if they prove to be untrue, give rise to a potential claim for breach of damages, which is where your team come in. And the damages would effectively look at, well, what's the loss and what would the buyer have been prepared to pay had the warranty actually been true rather than false, as it's turned out to be. And you need to be very careful as a seller what warranties you're signing up to, and whether or not you can be confident that everything you're saying is correct. So every transaction we do has a suite of warranties in it, and pretty much every single seller client that I act for says, you don't need to worry about that. My business is really clean. Every single client on the sell side says that to me. I've got a really clean business. Yeah. As you go through it, and that's not to say their businesses are not in good shape.
Of course.
But very rarely you have a business where every single I has been dotted and every single T has been crossed. There's always something. And warranties cover things like your staff, your trading, your contracts, your property, intellectual property, IP, IT, websites, any number of things, anything you can think of. And then that, alongside that, is all of the taxation stuff as well. So yeah, we go through that process and say, well, we need to be reviewing these warranties. Are they appropriate to the transaction? Are they appropriate to the business that's being purchased? Because if they're not, why are they asking for them? And when you go through them, there's a process called disclosure, and that sits alongside the warranties and schedule. You might say, okay, we've got a warranty here that says that none of our staff are subject to a disciplinary hearing, for example. And you might actually have somebody who is. So what you do then is in the disclosure letter, you say, in relation to the warranty you asked us about employees on disciplinaries, actually, Joe Bloggs is currently up on a disciplinary. This is the reason why. This is the steps we've taken. This is the likelihood of there being a claim out of the back of it. And then the buyer has the opportunity to take a view of that information, say, well, does it sound serious? Does it sound like it's going to crystallize into a potential loss once I've got my hands on the company? And they can address that accordingly. And you might see that working itself out in an indemnity, which is slightly different to a warranty, of course. So warranties, you need to prove loss. It's a breach of contract. Indemnity is effectively, this happened, you need to reimburse me for pound the loss that I've suffered. So similar but not the same. And very often that's the order of events, is that you have warranty schedule, disclosure, and then an indemnity off the back of the disclosure. Because for every warranty claim that arises, that's money that you've been given by the buyer that you're going to have to pay back to the buyer. And you don't want to be in a situation where your price is being chipped. You've got this great offer on the table. And it goes right back to what I said at the start, preparation. Yeah. So if you've had the opportunity to prepare your business for sale, the likelihood of these issues catching you off guard is less. And also, if there is something that maybe might spook a buyer, you can present it in the most positive way and say, actually, we're aware of this issue. We're going to be really upfront with you about it, just to let you know this is going on. This is what we're doing already to deal with it. Yeah. And that makes it much harder for a buyer to start to chip that price away and say, well, we said we give you $1 million. Actually, it's looking a bit more like 800,000 now because of these things. So, yeah.
And I think even from a buyer, I appreciate I asked the question in relation to sellers, really, but even from a buyer's perspective, on the surface, you'll have seen so many businesses which all the glitz and glamour's there, they're making a lot of noise in the right way. Everyone sees them to be on the rise, and next thing you know, you wake up and they've gone pop. So before you make that massive investment or commitment, it gives you an opportunity to look behind the scenes, tear away at the noise, and really establish, is this something that we want to be going forward with or not?
That's it. I mean, the due diligence process as a buyer really is something that you can't afford to skip. You're investing significant amounts of money into something like you've said. Why would you not look into it?
No.
If you're going to buy a car, and that's the common analogy, if you're going to buy a car, you don't just buy it, you go and have a look at it, you kick the tyres and pretend you look under the bonnet and know what you're talking about. Or you ask someone that you know to come along who does actually know what they're talking about to look under the bonnet. And it's the same thing. You look at the business and say, okay, well, it looks like it's doing this. That all looks great. That's why we're attracted to it. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's get into the weeds of it and say, well, let's have a look at these key contracts. Or are they in fact in a bit of trouble with one of their main suppliers, for example? Is there a cash flow issue that we haven't been able to identify from the publicly available information? And that really is absolutely vital as a buyer. You need to be doing that. And that's where that process is going to save you money as a buyer.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I guess these are more the traditional routes of buying or selling a business, what most people are familiar with, what we see or what we read in the press. Something I feel, and I may be completely wrong here, so please do correct me, are employee-owned schemes in essence coming into place where, again, the family-run businesses or smaller SMEs, they've never really thought to sell, but they're getting on to a stage where they want to just finish from the business, but they feel there's no one better than the current team to take over. The structure is completely different to a corporate entity coming in. But is this something that you're dealing with? Is it something you see on the rise?
Absolutely. So that there are various different structures for employee ownership, but the one which is particularly, I guess, a hot topic at the moment is a structure called an employee ownership trust, or EOT. And these are very popular for a number of reasons. One, they do, as you've suggested, give the ownership, the power into the control of the employees. And that's not just the employees at that time, but employees who come into the business. The other benefit from a selling point of view is that there are significant tax benefits to selling to an employee ownership trust. So there is 100% relief on any capital gains tax, for example, on exit, which is, of course, attractive to a seller. And so we've seen a number of those. We've probably done 10 or so of these transactions over the last 12, 18 months where sellers have been selling into an EOT. What I would say is, from a seller's point of view, they look really attractive. Tax-free exit, what could be better? But it's far from as clear-cut as that. Nothing comes for free, as they say. And the flip side to that is that it's much harder to get your cash out in an EOT. Because you need to fund it. And obviously the employees are not going to fund the purchase. You're selling into a trust, so you might be able to get a little bit of funding from one of the banks, although the banks are reluctant to lend on EOT structures because they're a little bit quirky. And you might have a bit of cash in the business, which you could extract as that initial consideration slug. But thereafter, you're probably looking at, perhaps 5 to 10 years of deferred consideration. And that is a reasonably long period of time where you haven't quite got that clean break that you might have in a trade sale. Sure. You've still got to have at least one eye on what's going on and probably a little bit more involvement than that. So if you're looking to walk away into the sunset, an EOT is probably not for you. I think the thing I would say about those is the EOT needs to be right for the business. Not all businesses suit employee ownership. And you need to recognize what that looks like, what it means, what does it mean for the employees to have a say and controlling aspect in that company. Are they in a position to make a valid judgment as to what needs to happen? Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not.
And I think the bigger picture from my perspective looking at this is, whilst it may sound attractive and you may think you're doing the right thing for the employees, it may be at their detriment, because they may just be perfect at doing what they do, which I wouldn't doubt for a second if they're at that stage. But the actual running an operation, if you get that side of it wrong, it's people's livelihood and income at risk. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I think from a traditional business owner who'd wants to sell the business, it's very important that they seek that advice of what structure's best for them. With your experience, or more accurately, your team's experience, I know a lot of people have a bit of a hesitation to reach out because they think it's going to cost them an arm and a leg just to get that advice. I'm sure that isn't the case. Yeah. And if people wanted to reach out, really just to have that informal chat, I'm sure members of your team and yourself are more than happy to really listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, of course.
And no doubt through your contacts and other parties that you work with, such as accountants, you can explain the process far easily to them, and really what does the pound in their pocket look like after the tax, after the costs and everything else.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's not a legal transaction, it's a whole bunch of things. So you're looking at accountants, as you've alluded to already, and it needs to be an accountant that knows what they're doing with M&A, with no disrespect to the high street accountants who are great at keeping a company's books ticking over. When it comes to disposals and the tax implications of that, is a little bit more specialized, so we do recommend getting appropriate accounting advice at that point. But there's also corporate finance who would feed into that, so they're experts in drumming up interest in sale and putting you in touch with finance providers, for example, private equity, all different lending streams like that, and business advisors as well who would be able to come in and offer some advice there. But those sorts of initial conversations are really important and not something that generally we would look to be charging for. It's at that point it's getting to know you, getting to know your business. What are your goals, your hopes, your dreams from what you're looking at, and how can we offer some assistance? Can we put you in touch with someone who might be able to look at the taxation side of things for you, or look at possible lending streams, put you in touch with a private equity house who might be interested in your particular sector. So it's more than just the words on the page, it's the contact books that we've got as well that hopefully add some value.
And I think that's a very important point, because there'll be many businesses, we hope, who are listening to this just to get an understanding of what corporate law is, and they're thinking, we want to leave our industry and retire, so to speak, but we do such a niche area of work. How do we look to sell this business? We don't really have many local competitors. We want to sell it. What do we do? What's the next stage? And that's where I think you've hit the nail on the head. That simple phone call or email with a member of your team can point them into several different directions where the pools are bigger, so to speak. Everyone's got a network, and who knows what one discussion can lead to.
That's it. And you'll be surprised who ends up being a viable purchaser for your business. You look at it and you go, well, I know the marketplace within which I work. It's not that big that, there's 5 or 6 possible names out there. But actually, it's not always those people who are the best fit. They might well be, but often it can be a supplier. Often it can be a competitor. Often it could be someone in a completely different industry who actually can combine what you do with they do and create a new synergy for a new revenue stream. And you wouldn't know that without investigating the marketplace in a bit more detail.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, David. I'm very grateful for your time. It's been a very helpful update, at least for me. I'm sure for everyone who's listening as well. So very grateful, and thank you once again.
You're welcome, Shores. Thanks.